So I guess we could go ahead and start. Usually people can just jump on afterwards. But first, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time. And for everyone else who's joining, thank you for being here. Good afternoon. My name is Chisom Udeze. I am an economist and CEO of a company that works with private firms, public institutions, and intergovernmental organizations to deliver business strategies and drive growth. I am also the founder of Diversify. Diversify is an organization in Norway that has three core mandates to provide professional empowerment through giving people the tools and the resources they need to either start their own businesses or to secure employment. Our second mandate addresses mental health and wellness. And of course, our third mandate is to enhance community building, especially for people of international backgrounds and immigrant groups. So today, of course, we are here on professional empowerment. And we are speaking with the brilliant Jemila. Jemila is a creative director and editor of the multiple award-winning Circumspect, which she founded herself. It's a digital platform and company that is dedicated to meaningful insights, interactions, and creative actions related to Africa and Africans. Jem is also an economist and works with companies and organizations like the African Development Bank, the World Bank Group to leverage digital content and tools. Jemila creates and delivers engaging and interactive digital training skills for professionals, small to medium-sized enterprises and entrepreneurs. And she teaches them how to use social media and other digital resources to effectively drive their company's mandates and strategies. She's also a TEDx speaker and future of Ghana Top 30 Under 30, which is pretty cool. She has written for brands like Devex, Global Voices, and the LSE Africa blog. She's also been featured on Al Jazeera, BBC, Dutch Well, is that how you say it, Jemmy?
Jemila.
Okay, Dutch Well. And This is Africa and Third Catalog. Jemmy has a master's in international economics and international affairs from the John Hopkins University. She has a BA in economics and French, so she also speaks fluent French from Mount Holyoke in the US. Jemmy has worked in over 10 countries. And how many countries have you lived in, actually? 10?
I think I've lived in just about that same
Just
number,
about
right?
that?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. So yes, thank you, of course, for being here. We're really excited to have you and to pick your brains. I think a lot of people were also excited for this session because I've been receiving questions even up until last minute, you know, people asking like, this is my situation, can you help? So we hope we can hopefully cover these questions. And of course, feel free to send us questions if we're having a conversation and something jumps out to you, and we'll be sure to take them as we go along. But Jamie, I'm just gonna start and ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, obviously beyond what I've covered, and then we take it from there.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Chisom, for the kind introduction and for organizing this webinar. She didn't mention, but we actually go back. What year was that? 2009, 2010. So we've known each other for over 10 years, and it's amazing seeing, you know, all the amazing things Chisom has done. She is a very, very committed person and a go-getter. So for those of you who get to interact with her more closely, you are really lucky. So what I have been up to beyond what Chisom said, I guess with COVID, not too much has changed for myself and for Circumspect because we are a digital platform. But what I've been trying to do now is to create more content for people who are trying to figure out the digital elements, since I've been doing that for almost 13 years now. So constantly trying to get that information out there for people so that we can adapt, because I think that is really what we are being required to do during this period. Besides that, it's trying to connect with friends and family from across the world. I know that this is a global crisis and many of us are struggling with it and trying to figure out how to find our zen. So it's a big part of what my day-to-day looks like right now is scheduling just check-ins with family and friends as well. And then trying to do webinars like this one. Circumspect has a few webinars also planned, which I will share about later after we're done with this session.
Yeah, we'll actually already have someone asking about how they can connect with you online. So I'll be sure to share as much resources on Jemila as possible. Also in the newsletter that you will get, basically summarizing this whole session. But so just to jump right into it. So we've been doing this sessions for, I think, 3-4 weeks now. And oftentimes people have the question, like, how do I get the first client? Like, we acquire all these tools, but, you know, like having the tools is one thing, and then having it materialize into a paying client is another. So I kind of just want to ask you right off the bat, like, how did you get your first client? What amount of work did you have to put in for it to materialize into a paying customer? Not someone who wants something for free, not someone who wants help.
I think for getting the first client for me was, I'm trying to think back because even though I started freelancing or being a solopreneur about 5 years ago, I've been doing some like freelance gigs since I was in school. And I'm trying to remember like what that first one was, but I can't really remember it. But I do know that it probably came through a referral. So your personal networks or your professional networks are probably one of the main places that you are going to find or be linked to your first client. And what that means is that you really have to have a focus on building meaningful relationships. It's not simply a matter of constantly selling or promoting yourself. It's really about taking the time to build those kind of relationships and to nurture them, even if it's at a distance, right? So I would say that would probably have been how I got my first client. And then, of course, this element about marketing or highlighting your skill sets, because you might have an awesome network, but if they don't know what you do, then when opportunities come around, they're probably not going to think about you. So it's also making sure that you are highlighting the things that you care about, you're passionate about, or the things that you're really, really good at. And that way, when those opportunities come, you become one of the first people that they think about, and then they pass on those opportunities. So I would say for me, this is probably the first year that I'm actually going hard on marketing. And then I think a lot of people find that funny because I teach people how to market, but it hasn't been the kind of marketing that we usually see where it's immediately saying, buy this from me. I don't believe in that method because I feel like it can be a bit disingenuous. So this is the first year that I'm actually going hard on marketing, and people have noticed and are like, I see what you're doing. But before that, it was all about nurturing the relationships that I have, being of assistance and value. And we'll talk more about that later on.
Okay, thank you. And when you say going hard on marketing, what does that look like for you?
Okay, so right now, what that looks like is, for example, yesterday I was on national radio talking about how COVID is impacting entrepreneurs in Ghana. And before I was going hard on marketing, I would probably not say too much about what Circumspect does. I would just like respond to the questions. But now I'm plugging. So it's figuring out how to plug when you have the opportunity to plug. It is, even if you are offering free resources, making sure at the end of, if it's an article, at the end of it, or at some point in the article, you highlight the paid services that you offer, that kind of thing. So that's what I mean by going hard on marketing. And then also being laser focused. So this year, for example, Circumspect, we talk about a lot of things, and we try to follow and jumpstart relevant conversations. So last year, for example, was a big year for Ghana with the Year of Return initiative, and we got ahead of that. I like to think that we helped spark a lot of that conversation with the content that we put out. This year, even before COVID hit Ghana, as far back as, let's say, December last year, I already knew this year was going to be all about digital for Circumspect, that we were really going to put our offerings front and center. And COVID just kind of accelerated that, because there is a big need and we can help in that respect. So that's what I mean by going hard on marketing.
And I have to say, actually, with the whole, because I follow Jemmy on social media, and the whole Year of Return in Ghana, I actually learned about it from, you know, your updates and from the things you would post. And I think if I were not following you, I probably would have not really heard about it. So yeah, definitely, you do push out quite a lot of information that I find useful. And I think I have a question that relates to basically how to put out information and to a point where it doesn't annoy people, but we can get to that in a bit. So for now, I would like to talk about branding. So this session, we're talking about personal branding, and we're also going to talk about social media marketing. So the first segment here, I'd like to talk about branding, and then social media marketing, and then the overlapping questions. So my first question on branding would be, what do you think are the most important strategies and techniques that people can apply or employ when starting a business, and especially when they're bootstrapping, you know, when they don't have a lot of money, you know, to just toss around?
Yeah. So I'm going to take, I think this is a kind of two in one question, on the personal branding techniques, and then also on if you're starting a business and you're bootstrapping. I'll take the second one first. So on starting the business, I think I'm going to speak primarily from Circumspect's perspective. So it might not necessarily tally with what might be mainstream, just to put that disclaimer out. But what worked for Circumspect really was to dedicate a good chunk of time to testing and experimentation, right? So even before the company was registered, what ended up happening was that we would get requests for specific services. Oh, can you help us do some social media coverage? Can you come up with an article, or can you do a training? All of that stuff. And so before I actually went ahead to register the company, I spent about a year to 2 years. I wanted it to be 6 months, but it dragged to about a year to 2 years, really doing testing and experimentation. And what that means is, for example, if I ended up going for a speaking engagement or a panel event, I paid attention to the questions that people were asking. That was my research period, really. And then based off of the questions that I got a lot of, I paid attention to the trends in the questions. And then I would see, okay, there's a clear need here. Let's see if it's something that we can offer value in, and if people would be willing to pay. So one example I'll give is with our Circ Mixers. Our Circ Mixers are networking events that we do, not every year, but we try to do from time to time. The reason why we started doing that was because I noticed from going to all these panel events that there wasn't actually any real networking happening. People would come, sit, listen to the panelists talk, and then after that, that's it. Like, people go home, or the panelists leave before the thing is ended. So there wasn't an opportunity to really connect with each other. And I believe that value is not just had with the people on the panel. I believe that when you go to such events, a lot of the value is also from the people who are just in the room, the participants. So we created that Circ Mixer initiative to enable the participants themselves to add value to each other. With the very first one we did in 2017, I decided to test out with a crazy pricing model. My sister and one of my friends thought it was really crazy because I said, there's no price to this. So we didn't put a fee, but we said, pay what you want. And people were like, but Ghanaians like free things, so nobody's going to pay. But I was really curious to see what would happen if people got the value or something that they were missing. So we just said, pay what you want. If you really want to pay, this is a suggested amount you can pay. And we I don't know if I should even use the word sold out, but we had a packed event, over 100 people, largely readers of Circumspect, attended the event. And what was really heartwarming to me is people paid, even though they didn't have to. Some people came through, didn't pay, but by the time they were leaving, they were like, no, I absolutely have to pay for this because I got so much value. And that showed that people will pay if there's value. So it's little things like testing, doing your research, listening to the questions, and then also recognizing that it's also a question of keeping your costs low as much as possible. For Circumspect, that has been relatively easy because it's largely digital. But one of the things that I encountered very early on in Ghana was this question of, why don't you have an office? And there's this whole allure around being a startup and having a swanky office with nice furniture and all of that stuff. I would have loved to do that, but it just didn't make sense for the kind of business I have where it is largely digital and I need to be nimble, right? So now we're seeing that businesses can actually operate without being in offices, right? We're also seeing that a lot of the vanity metrics will not hold depending on the context you're in. But at that time, that was something that a lot of, I probably lost a lot of potential clients just because I couldn't say, come to my office. And I said, you know, my office is my laptop and I work wherever I am. So a big part of it is also staying true to what you are trying to do and staying true to what you really, really believe is going to work. It might not make sense to everybody, but that is okay. That's why it came to you, and it's your project or your business. But also stay practical. If something is not working, you need to be able to identify that and pivot away from it. If one last example on that, on being practical. When I moved back to Ghana, my goal was to work with companies and corporates to help them on digital. But after having a few conversations, I quickly realized that that probably would not be a good option because a lot of the businesses or business people at the time just didn't see the value in digital. So I would have spent a lot of time preparing proposals. I would have spent time and money on transport, trying to get meetings. And at the end of it, I probably would not have even, you know, gotten the meetings or been able to work with these people. So I had to pivot away from that initial idea based off of what the reality on the ground was. So yeah, so stay practical, but also stay true to the values and to this vision that you have for your business.
So, and thanks for that. I wanted to ask a question that Chugo has actually kind of touched on, because for a while after you moved back from the US to the continent, you were working at the AFDB, right? For a while, and at the same time you were still managing Circumspect. So when did you know that, okay, I can take that jump, I can take that risk, especially being African, where, you know, like you need almost to be guaranteed, you know, that you have, you don't leave a great job to an uncertain job, you know. So I guess the question here is, what pushed you to become a solopreneur, like you call it? And also, was it feasible when you were still juggling two balls to do, what was the experience like when you were working full-time at a great job and also trying to grow Circumspect?
Okay, thank you for the question, Chisom and Choko. So Circumspect has been around for 12 years, right? It's been the, what's the word I should use? The most constant thing, apart from my family and friends, of course. It's been the most constant thing from college all the way to my master's. And so it has always been, I don't want to call it the side gig, but yes, it's the side hustle. And it's, what's it called, evolved over time. So it started from this being just like a passion, hobby thing that I was doing, to wow, like people are actually finding value in this, and then trying to create a community and continue to offer that, to, as you mentioned, when I finished grad school and then I joined the African Development Bank in Tunisia. Now, when I was in Tunisia, it was actually harder for me to create content because of the demands of the job. Like the job I was doing involved a lot of travel, and a lot of hours, basically. And so I wasn't doing as much work on Circumspect, but once in a while I would still do that work. How I knew that it was time to take that risk was, again, the questions, right? So even though I was at the African Development Bank and I was working with a very specific department within the bank, I would keep getting requests from other departments to help them on digital stuff, right? So I worked with the bank during their annual meetings, which is the biggest event that they have every year. They have all these presidents and high level people from across the world in development participating in that. And I helped them on digital marketing for the event, help them get verified on Twitter, all these things. And so paying attention to the questions, it was like, there's a clear need here, because even as I'm doing all this other stuff, like this is what keeps being called on. It was not an easy decision, but why I was able to make that decision is because I planned for it. So before I actually put in my resignation from the job, that would have been, let's say, about 8, 9 months after I had already decided that I wanted to explore what Circumspect could be, right? I wanted to take a chance on Circumspect because we'd, up until that point, pretty much supported other people's projects. And the question was always like, what else can we do? Like, how else can we add value if I was to focus my attention on that specifically? And yes, it was scary because, you know, the money at the bank was good. I used it to pay off my school loans, thank God. But it was also something that allowed me to prepare to be able to go full time as a solopreneur. And what I recommend is, as much as possible, try to do both until you can't do both anymore. You want to um, still be able to pay your bills and live, you know, and have that security that we all need. And then create the time to explore this thing that you're trying to build. When I was a student, I would work on Circumspect over the weekends. When I was in Washington, D.C., working as a journalist, it was over the weekends. I would always have content out at least once a week. So don't think too much about the entire picture, because I think sometimes when we do that, it scares us into not doing anything. But just look at what can you feasibly do every week or every few days with your business and while you are doing your 9 to 5. And when it is time to leave, nobody will have to tell you. You will know that you are ready to take that risk. It will be different for different people. For some people, they will have to leave and come back many times. I've coached some freelancers who left their jobs, thought they were going to do freelancing, tried it out, and realized that they didn't want to do that. And that is totally okay as well. So just be patient with yourself in that way and try as much as possible to prepare as best possible before you make that jump.
Okay, thank you. So what are the common or most common mistakes people make when branding?
Okay, so I think I forgot to answer that question about personal branding. So I'll just tie that in. Things that you need to do when you are trying to brand yourself. The first one, and this is the hardest one, is get to know yourself. And I know that it probably doesn't sound like what you might have expected to hear, but it's really important to get to know who you are, the values you stand for, what your passions are, the vision and mission you have, the goals you have. And not just that, to also understand how you show up in the world. And what I mean by how you show up in the world is we have our own perceptions of our self-image, but when we are interacting with people, and depending on who we are interacting with, they might see us differently. And I think a lot of us shy away from hearing how we are showing up in the world to other people. But guess what? Your brand is basically the perception of who you are, right? And that includes how other people perceive you. So it's important to take some time to understand who you are and identify your key traits and elements and principles and values, but also pay attention to what other people are saying. And if it's not aligned, that's where you do the work, right? If it's not aligned with who you believe yourself to be, that's where you do the work. Some mistakes that people make, I think the number one is trying to be someone else, right?
Yeah.
The number one is this idea of maybe you have someone who you follow on social media and you really like the way their brand is, and you're like, yeah, I want to be exactly like them. But the truth is you cannot be exactly like them. And you might be able to have the blueprint, but at the end of the day, it's a question about the essence. Like, what are you putting into that? So don't try to be like someone else, because if you do that, then you're really just taking on a persona, and it's not, it might work for a while, but from what I see, it doesn't last too long. Like, you can't keep up being pretentious. So this concept of fake it till you make it, in some instances, yes, it's enough to just start you off and give you the motivation to start, but don't let that become the modus operandi that you use, because otherwise it typically will backfire. So there's that. Number two, branding yourself is a process. It's not something that you've taken this webinar and then, hey, now I know how to brand myself and I'm good to go. No, it's a process and it involves a lot of work. I would say with me, I'm trying to remember what year I started hearing from people, oh, Jemila, you're a brand, you're a brand. Like, people saw me as a brand before I saw myself as a brand, right? So when they started saying that is when I started paying more attention, right? Because again, when people pay attention to the questions and the comments that you hear consistently. So that's when I started paying a little bit of attention and started saying, okay, so what are the things that they're seeing that they consider to be my brand? And then I started paying a bit more attention to that. So it's going to be a process. Another thing, branding is not just about the optics. It is not just about, I think a lot of businesses, especially when they think about branding, they think about having a logo. That's usually the first thing, the visual identity, to have a logo. But you might have the logo, but it might not necessarily be representative of your brand. It might be you're just starting off today, so you're here and you think that this is who I am, but you need the time to evolve to get here. So if you're creating the logo at this point, and on top of that, remember what I said about stay lean, like try and manage your costs. Like, don't put money into things that you're not yet sure of to some degree. So by the time you get here, it might not be the same. And that's why you'll occasionally see some brands like do a rebranding. But doing a rebranding, like, don't do it every year, because then that's not actually the brand. So with Circumspect, we only got our logo in 2014. That's after 7 years of existence. Right. And by that time, we knew what we stood for, what the values we wanted people to identify with were, and our logo has meaning. The other thing with logos is ideally it should be timeless in a way, right? So if you look at all of these major brands, their logos might have shifted slightly, but for the most part, not too much. They have similar elements, similar visual elements, and so on. So I would say don't just focus on the surface level things. Really try to get the substance first, because the substance ends up being the foundation for everything else. And so whatever Circumspect, for example, we decide to do, 12 years ago, we were just a blog, right? Just a blog putting out content. 7 years ago, we started doing like events. And then now we're actually offering digital services. But at the end of the day, everything we do, our brand remains the same, and our goal and mission remains the same: inform, interact, inspire. Yeah. So that's, yeah,
Okay.
that's what I'd say on that.
Okay, thank you. I have a question actually from one of the participants that I think is a good segue here. She says she's a marketeer, a beauty entrepreneur, and she's been running a brand since 2015. And she's also a mentor to young people in different entrepreneurial fields. So, you know, like she's a mentor, she's a coach. She's also a wife and a mom of two. And so she feels that she wears a lot of different hats. So her question is, how does she define and talk about all that she is in social media, on social media, and how can she present herself better? Because she feels that in wearing several hats, it's hard for her to know how she should brand herself, you know, but each of these things mentioned are a significant part of who she is. And she wants to put herself out there, and this is her challenge. So do you have any feedback for her?
Yes, and I think this is something I hear a lot of from my coachees and trainees. And it's something that I also struggled with initially, because when I was in high school, one of the prizes that I won was most all-round student, right? Meaning I had a lot of interest. I was playing basketball, football, I was running the school lab, I like to think a good student, all of these different interests. And the question was, we live in a world where people like to put us in a box. And so you have to be this and nothing else. But the truth is we are complex. And the truth is we play many different roles at different points in time. And women especially, I think we somehow feel like we have to be one thing or maybe two things, but nothing else. I like to think that, you know, being such a multifaceted individual is exactly part of your brand. It's part of what makes you who you are and what feeds into the essence of your brand. So even as you're wearing multiple hats, what you need to try to do, I would say, is you could do a number of things. So first of all, try to figure out what the linkages between all these different roles you play are, right? Because there's usually linkages between all of them. When you, as a mother, like what is your mothering style, or how do you show up in that way? As a beauty entrepreneur, how do you show up in that way? What are the core things that you hold onto truly and dearly? Remember when I said that you need to try to figure out what your principles and your values are? That's typically how it's going to, you know, show up in your brand. So don't be so attached to the titles. Focus more on the verb, the being, the action, right? So for example, I'll give you a quick example. With, as an individual or who I am, I'm naturally a communicator, right? Since I was a child. I'm also someone who can empathize with people very easily. Like it's not hard for me to see another person's perspective and to listen to that. And then I'm the kind of person who comes up with ideas very quickly or can find you resources if you need it, right? And this is something that, just tying in Chiogo's question about what other people think. This is something that other people would always say. If they were to describe Jemila in one word, consistently, they would say resourceful, resourceful, resourceful. And that shows up in who I am as a sister, who I am as a daughter, hopefully who I will one day be as a wife, and especially who I am as an entrepreneur and a creative. I am someone who gives resources, right? And so that feeds into the kind of brand that I have and the kind of brand that Circumspect is, right? So try and figure out what the commonalities between all of those are, and you are probably going to get closer to those essential elements that, depending on context, will probably stay the same. So that's number one. Number two, the great thing is when it comes to social media marketing, you have options for days, right? So if you're having a hard time figuring out which aspect of yourself you should be highlighting, pick at least two platforms and show two aspects of yourself on each platform, right? So if, for example, you're in the beauty space, I'm trying to just think really quickly, you're in the beauty space, a clear one would be Instagram, right? So Instagram can be where you highlight the beauty tips, highlight what you're doing with your beauty business, etc. But you are also a mother and a wife, right? How do you translate that and show that aspect elsewhere? You could easily do that on Facebook, right? So if you have like a Facebook group, then you can talk about what it's like juggling all these roles as a mother and a wife, sharing your parenting tips with other women, that kind of stuff. And you are a professional. So LinkedIn would be probably where you go to highlight that professional expertise. So take advantage of the tools that you have. And then the other thing too is you don't have to show all of those things at once. There's a quote by, I think it's Oprah, who says that you can have and be everything you want to be, just not at once, right? And I believe that quote. So if today the most important thing for you is to focus on the beauty entrepreneurship that you're doing, highlight that first. Maybe a year from now, you might shift focus and decide to highlight what it's like to be a mom as well as an entrepreneur. Maybe down the line, you might realize that, you know what, I want to highlight what it's like to nurture your relationships with your family. So don't put the pressure on yourself to do everything at once. I really believe in the value of time and in the value of taking the time to build things up from scratch and adding on the layers as you go. So that's what I would say on that. Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, and if I can also add to that, I think you're actually spot on. Because I recall when I started Diversify, I was angry about something in society. I needed to fix it. It was not enough to be angry. I had to do something. So I started Diversify to teach people how to start their own businesses. And then we started to grow, and then we added on mental health because it was something that a lot of our target groups struggle with. It was something that I struggled with when I moved to Norway, and then thereafter we started adding other community building activities, like say lunch sessions where we talk about different issues around diversity, or yoga sessions. And I recall having a conversation with a lady who was trying to collaborate with me, and she said, oh, but I'm not sure what you do. What are you about? Like Diversify. And I said, what about these three things currently? And it might be 4 or 5 things in a year. It's just meeting the needs that we have. So we did. So basically what I'm trying to say here is I completely agree with you that we have grown and people have come along with us as we continue to increment our services and our offerings, and our identity is becoming stronger. And I think it's very important to, like you said, we don't have to do it all at once, but it could be something we do stepwise for sure.
Yeah. And I just wanted to also add on that, because one of the things that I struggled with initially was this question of labels, right? So let's say people would consistently refer to me as a blogger. And for the longest time, the ego does things, like we're human beings. And so you have all of these things in you. And it's like, I'm not just a blogger, I'm an economist. I've done X, Y, Z, and so after a while, I began to understand that, people try to define you, but they do that from their own understanding. And if even you as an individual, like every year or so you change, the person you started off as at the beginning of 2019 is not the person who exited 2019. For all of us this year, especially, by the time we exit 2020, we are going to be vastly different.
Yeah.
And so if even you who spends your entire life with yourself, whether you are buddy or you like to like keep yourself at a distance, you are constantly learning who you are. Just try to think about the perspective of someone who is not intimately knowledgeable about who you are. People will pick a label that is easy for them to identify you as. Yeah. It's okay. Just know that you have all these other elements. And as time goes on, one thing you will have to do as part of branding is to specify how you want to be defined. Yeah. So, for example, whenever Circumspect or I am doing a speaking engagement, I make it a point to indicate what my preferred title is. Why? Because depending on the context, I want to emphasize different things. So if I am talking to, let's say if I'm talking to a group of young girls, right, who are just about to finish high school, I might say my preferred title is Big Sister and Mentor. If I am talking to businesses that are trying to figure out digital, I will say that my preferred title is Digital Strategist. If I am in the space where it's like development people and economists, I would definitely say I'm an economist and a policy consultant. So you can figure out, depending on the context, how you want to define yourself. And if other people define you differently, just remember that they don't know your entirety. And so, be a little gentle with them and just let it go. Let it go. Of course, if they're slandering you or something, that's totally different. But yeah, that's something I wanted to add on.
Thank you for that. We have a question here from Anna. She says that what advice would you give to someone trying to build a brand and a career different from what they have studied? And I thought this was interesting because this is you. She said she's afraid potential customers and people in the field might not trust her because her education on LinkedIn and her CV does not match what she's doing now and the career and the brand she's trying to build now.
That's a really good question. And again, still coming back to this concept of people putting you in a box and wanting to stick with it. What I would say is the same things that you would do if you were trying to get, let's say you were trying to get a job, right, in a very specific industry, let's say in PR. And that is, you went to school and you studied PR. You're probably going to highlight your expertise in PR. So if you have a brand and a career that is different from what it is that you studied, you want to make sure that you are indicating the elements of this brand and career that is different in a way that it promotes those elements about yourself. So for a lot of people who have like a side hustle or are freelancing in an area different from what they studied, what you want to focus on is highlighting transferable skills. That's a very important one. Highlight the transferable skills. For example, if let's assume that I'm trying to think. Okay, this is actually a good example. So in college, one of the things I studied was I took a class on astronomy, and it is something I wish I had actually taken time to build on, but I didn't do it. I did economics. If let's say I ended up focusing on astronomy, and now I wanted to do something related to economics, and I studied both, but for the most part, I had focused primarily on astronomy. How do I highlight what transferable skills from astronomy will feed into the work I'm doing with economics? Very simple one is this question of questions for both of them. Science asks questions and economists ask questions. Economists ask questions with so many what if clauses that I'm sure they'll give scientists a run for their money. So you highlight that element of you're curious. And that curiosity can take the form of either being an astronomer or being an economist. Another thing to focus on is soft skills. So people don't really give soft skills the value that they actually hold. But I think that is changing with the future of work, and the way the landscape is shifting. So really try to highlight some of those soft skills. If you are a people person and you know how to work with people, that is valuable regardless of what industry you find yourself in. If you are the kind of person who is really great at highlighting the little details, you're very detail oriented, that might be awesome for working in, let's say, medicine. Let's say as a surgeon, you have to pay attention to every little thing. But it could also feed into the creative space. So try to look at what the overlaps between those two areas might be. And then for your LinkedIn profile, the beauty of a LinkedIn profile is that it's not static. Mm. Unlike a CV where you have to really, really target your CV to the job or the opportunity you're trying to get, the LinkedIn profile is dynamic. So what that means is feel free to add those other elements that might not be formal jobs or titles, but add to who you are and where you want to go. So if you really enjoy, let's say you do a lot of volunteering, right? In the area that you are looking to build your business, make sure you highlight that. If you have web links that you can link onto your LinkedIn profile. So if someone is like reading through, okay, fine, she's in finance, and then, oh wow, but what? She really cares about interior design. I actually have a friend who is doing that. She is a finance person, has worked in finance for years, but she is so passionate about African art and interior design. And so we had that conversation about how does she highlight both elements? And it's like, you are the common denominator. So if people ask you, where's the link? You're the link, right? And it's the fact that you're this complex person and you have multiple interests and you're able to, feed between these different worlds and feed them into one person, which is you. So I don't know if that answered your question, but let me know.
I think so. And someone else, Annalisa, said she had the same problem. She had the same issue where during an interview, she was asked why she's studying engineering and wants a job in marketing. But I think that, what you've talked about thinking about what skills you have that are transferable. I think that's a key point in how do you leverage yourself, because that's also what I try to do when I'm consulting. Is sometimes before now, before say 3 years ago, I took projects in finance and development, and recently, say a year and a half ago, I had an opportunity to take a job in maritime and shipping. I knew absolutely nothing about, but what I did know was that I had skills that I could easily transfer from all my different experiences that would be useful and valuable to the company that was about to hire me. And that was exactly what I said to them. I said, I don't know anything about maritime and shipping, but what I do know are these skills that I have that will be valuable to your company and in bringing the type of value and the results that you want. So I completely agree with that. And thank you, because I'm just like, hi, Chisom, you were smart back then. Good. It's nice.
Yeah, and be open to learning. I think people it's okay to say that you're willing to learn, and to highlight the fact that you are a fast learner. If you are a fast learner, So if you're studying engineering, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, but a lot of marketing is about engineering, right? You are basically anticipating specific goals, specific results, and working towards that. So try to always see what are the overlaps. Just think a little deeper. What are the overlaps, and how can you highlight those elements? And as Chisom said, people might actually hire you because you're interesting, right? Because you're not the typical engineer, and you have this other context that you can bring into that space or into their company. Yeah. So just, give it a shot.
Thank you. So we have a question here from Kelvin. I have to say right now that I feel like we need to bring Jemmy back for like 4 different sessions with all the questions I'm getting. But I'm gonna jump onto Kelvin. He says, what has been the biggest obstacle you have faced in building your personal brand? That's the first question. And the second is, how do you separate your personal brand from your business brand?
Okay, thank you for the questions, Kelvin. So biggest obstacles, I think a lot of those obstacles are internal. A lot of those obstacles are the human element, if I can call it that. Sometimes you feel like you're not good enough. That's that's one thing. Sometimes you might say you are something and it's more aspirational than it is the reality right now. So sometimes some of the statements people put out, they might say they're an entrepreneur, but the reality is they're trying to be an entrepreneur. So it's a question of, how do I even describe this, man? It's a question of centering yourself in that way and being okay with putting yourself out there. I think I've heard this a lot of people feeling reluctant to highlight all the amazing things they're doing because they feel like they will be judged. And yes, there is some judgment. I won't lie, there is some judgment. There's also this thing of setting expectations, and people putting very high expectations on you. I'll give you an example. Sometimes when you become a brand, in quotes, people forget that you are human. And so what might end up happening is they hold you to these very high expectations based off of the stuff that you've put out, and they leave very little room for you to make mistakes. And they judge you differently than they would somebody else who hasn't put their information out there. This is something I dealt with last year quite a lot because I was saying and writing about things that a lot of people didn't necessarily agree with. And it was this question of people saying, because you are highlighting the struggles of Ghana, for example, it means that you are unpatriotic. But my friends and people who know me know that I'm like so diehard on Ghana and Africa. And so it's this question of, how do you reconcile the two? And that can be challenging sometimes. It can take an emotional toll on you. But one thing that I highly recommend everybody do when you are trying to build your brand is to write for yourself a vision and mission statement. You know, even it, well, you don't have to write it, but even if it's just recording an audio and saying, talking to yourself and saying, this is who I am, this is what I believe in, this is what I aspire to be, so that when you have those moments where your perceptions of who you are really challenged, or your, in quotes, brand comes under attack, you go back to that. It's also important to have a support system, right? It is important to have a support system so that you don't buy your own BS, if I can say that.
Yes,
On here.
definitely.
Yeah. So you don't buy your own BS, because it's very easy to start seeing yourself as just this brand or this persona and not who you actually are, which is a human being who makes mistakes, who's not perfect, who is still learning and trying. So you need to have people who will keep you grounded, people who you can like have an honest conversation with and say, well, did you think I was being too egotistical in this way? And they can tell you and be real with you, and you can accept that. So it's like a balancing act. But I do see now that I think I didn't, even though I had a sense that people saw me as a brand, it was last year that I was like, yo, this landscape has changed. Like, for whatever reason, yeah, there's something going on here. And I put out a disclaimer to people. I was like, listen, at some point I'm gonna disappoint you. I just want you to know that. So, don't have such high expectations, because we're all just trying to figure things out. Second question. Oh, okay. And as a woman, I have to say this because I know there are a couple of women on here, but as a woman as well, there's a certain layer of, thankfully, I haven't experienced it too much, but I've watched other people experience it, like people who are are professionals, who are experts, who know their stuff. But by virtue of the fact that it's coming from a woman, sometimes some people will try to undermine them just by virtue of the fact that they're a woman, and might try to, just limit it to them being a woman and not necessarily what they have to offer or what their track record is and so on. So as a woman, there's that added layer of having to deal with some of that. And yeah, it's just to remind you that unfortunately it comes with the territory in some aspects, and it's not a reflection necessarily of who you are as a woman, but it's a question of other people getting comfortable with this notion of women being vocal, or women highlighting what they can actually do, especially depending on where you're coming from and what kind of perceptions we've had about who a woman should be and how she should show up as. I get that a lot as a Muslim woman, because I don't look, well, for some people, they don't consider me to be the stereotypical Muslim woman. But for me, it's still important to show up authentically in who I am, because I believe that even in a group of whether African women or Muslim women, there is diversity, and that diversity should be celebrated. How do you separate your personal brand from your business brand? That's a good question. Typically what I say, and I get that question all the time. So what I say is, when you are just starting up, whether you like it or not, your personal brand is going to be very tied to your business brand. Why? Because you are the one feeding the business. The essence of the business comes from you. So those elements will be there for a very long time. But after a point in time, when you realize that, for me, or maybe I'll just use my example. For me, I decided to separate my business brand from my personal brand when I realized that I didn't feel like I could express myself as a person freely, right? So, for example, on Twitter, I created a Twitter account for Circumspect out of need, because I used to do a lot of live tweeting at that time. I think it was around Ghana's elections. I was working on a project and we had to keep giving updates. So I was doing a lot of live tweeting, and Twitter used to put people in jail. I don't know if they still put people in jail, because I don't tweet as much these days. But they put me in jail, and I needed to continue whatever it was we were doing. So I created Circumspect's account, but it was largely a dormant account that I would use when I go into Twitter jail. Now, at a point in time, people would reference Jemila and Circumspect and mean the same thing, right? So they would say, oh, Circumspect, they actually mean me, or they would say Jemila and they actually mean Circumspect. And so when I noticed that, I was like, okay, it's time to make a split between who I am as a brand and then what Circumspect is as a brand. And so that process took, I would say, I started that process in 2014. So for the first 7 years, we were the same entity. 2014 is when I started working on branding Circumspect, creating social media accounts for it, having the logo, actually defining what Circumspect's mission, vision, etc. are, all those elements of branding. And what that means is that I now gave myself the freedom to say things I wanted to say without worrying about whether it would affect the brand. And I think this is why a lot of people ask about how do you make that separation. So you need to pay attention to at what point you really feel like your business brand is being developed. People are coming to you not because they know you personally, but because they've heard about your business brand, but they're referencing you in the same way. Or if you find that you feel restricted with what you can say as an individual, then that's when you need to make that separation, right? And then start creating your separate brand. But that said, what I do recommend for all businesses, even if you are still unsure about whether you're going to do this business thing, right? Create and save your social media accounts. Why? Because as more people come online, the likelihood of you finding a social media account that has the same name as your business or yourself is going to be lower. So go and save, and most of these accounts are free. Go and save an Instagram account, a Twitter account, Facebook, LinkedIn if you need to, YouTube. Just do a search there. If you do a search for available social media accounts or something of the sort on Google, it will pull up a number of platforms where you can do a quick search to know if the name that you're looking to have has already been saved on different accounts on platforms or not, and go ahead and save them. Even if you don't use them today, you can delete them later. But if you don't get it right now, then you lose it potentially forever. So that's one tip I'll give on that for your separating business and personal. Awesome.
Okay, thank you. I have a question here from Amethyst. What advice could you give to a mature lecturer who is passionate about research and teaching but wants to rebrand herself online? Is it too late? What avenues are available for an online teacher to monetize her knowledge?
It's never too late, man. Never. I really believe in the value of timing. And let me just say kudos to you for thinking about how to adapt, because the people who will win at the end of the day are those who are adaptable. That's just a law of nature, right? You figure out how to adapt. So kudos on that. And what I will also say is, since you have spent a considerable amount of time in research and teaching, right? There are specific insights that you have that someone who is new in that space probably does not have. So for someone like you, what I would suggest is LinkedIn. If you already have a LinkedIn account, LinkedIn has all these new features, one of which is you can write blog articles, right? So try and use those tools to highlight the expertise you have. If you've read something and you've done some research on it, share that content, but always try to include your perspective, right? So these are little things you can do to start rebranding yourself. But at the end of the day, it's like one thing that most people will say is, oh, I don't know how to create content. I don't have any content to create. The good news is that your entire life is content. So if you started off as a researcher 20 years ago, you have probably seen so many trends that someone who started 2 years ago has not seen. So think back to all of those moments, all of those milestones, and try to think of what the stories there are, right? So if 20 years ago, in order for you to be a researcher, you had to have a PhD degree or 2 PhD degrees, and today maybe the requirements are a bit different, you can highlight that stuff and talk about what are the different things in the research space that you've seen over time, right? Now, it might not sound like you're branding yourself, but I don't believe in, I like marketing that is subtle, not marketing that is in your face, right? So this is a way of subtle marketing because you are highlighting the fact that I've been in the game for over 2 decades. You're also highlighting the fact that you have noticed all these trends, and you're also giving value to people because you're saying, back then, this is what we needed to be a researcher, but today you might need this and this, but based off of my experience, you should also consider adding X, Y, Z. So I don't know if that answers your question. I do think that there are avenues for online teachers to monetize knowledge, especially now. You probably noticed that even a country like Ghana, where for the most part, our education is offline, but now we're moving online. Like they're using radio and TV and the web to teach students to make sure that they can continue their education despite the current situation. And a lot of the learning is probably going to continue to be online. So yeah, definitely consider that there are different platforms for that as well, to be able to teach people online. So all the best, Amethyst.
Thank you, Jemmy, for that answer. So another question from Ejiro. She says, have you ever failed publicly? And if yes, how did it affect your brand and how did you handle it?
Man. Yes. Simple answer is yes. So last year last year was a year, but I prefer last year over 2020 any day. Last year, what happened? So one of the things that I really care about, I think I'm an activist at heart as well. And so I usually try to use the platforms that I have to bring attention to social issues, especially in Ghana and across Africa. And there was an incident. One thing that I had spoken a lot about last year was about Ghana's healthcare system and the loop, like, just how many shortcomings we had in our healthcare system, really. And I got a lot of slack for talking about that because I know that people are sensitive about their work and whatever. But yeah, I got a lot of slack for that. And in one instance, there was a report about a child who supposedly had passed on before they got to the hospital, and there was all these questions about did they actually go through the right procedures and so on. And so someone tagged me on that, and I was in between meetings, and I shared it. I just retweeted it and shared it on I think it was my Facebook page. And after I shared it, by the time I left the meeting I was in and came out, it was all of these accusations about me intentionally putting out wrong information. And misinformation is something that is going to happen to everybody at some point, largely more so in Ghana and Africa, I would say, because of the channels of communication that we have and the fact that we don't really have like a fact-checking culture in many ways. Yeah. And even for someone like me who is aware about fact-checking, it's easy to still fall into that. And so last year was a big lesson on that front. So one person actually threatened me and said that my brand was going to take a hit for sharing that information, even though once I got the news that, okay, there might be some wrong information involved in what I had shared, and I went online and corrected it and let everybody know that, I'm doing more checks to make sure that this information is accurate. But that person, for whatever reason, just wanted to be on my case. Big learning moment for me. So I actually appreciate it. But what ended up happening was, so she said my brand would take a hit and my reputation would be messed up forever. But you see, the thing is, that is probably based off of her perceptions of why I do what I do. Mm-hmm. For me, at the end of the day, I don't care if I'm wrong, I will admit that I'm wrong. Like, that's who I am. And a lot of that is based off of my faith. There's this one specific Quranic verse that says, testify against your parents, testify against your loved ones, testify against yourself in order to make sure that you put out the truth. And that's something that I care about deeply. So her assessment of the situation ended up being off because I actually do not mind coming up to say I was wrong. And that's what I did. And so at the end of the day, the feedback I got from doing that was that people appreciated the fact that I could come out and say this was wrong and this should have happened in XYZ way. And this is how I'm going to try to make sure that doesn't happen again. So yeah, we all fail, but I believe that failures are good because they teach you and they kind of humble you as well, to make you be a bit more attentive to the things you do and how you do them. And also, it's a reality check. It's a reality check online for the fact that you really don't know the intentions of the people that you are dealing with online. And you just need to be aware of that fact. Like, not everyone is gonna like you, and that's totally fine. And for the people who are honest and give you honest criticism, I think that is so important. Like, stay open to it and pay attention to it and try to improve however you can. That's the best you can do. Great.
Thanks, Jemmy, for that. I especially love the, testify against your parents, your loved ones, and yourself. It's a really good quote. We have a question here from Annalisa, who says, how can I leverage LinkedIn in networking effectively as a fresh graduate, mainly for job opportunities without going for the LinkedIn premium?
Hi, Annalisa. Yes, you can totally do that. And the good news is LinkedIn has more features now than it did when I was graduating. So you actually have a lot that you could do. First thing I would say is make sure that your LinkedIn profile is updated. I'm going to probably put out at some point an article on how to improve your LinkedIn profile, but you can do a search online. There are already articles on that to figure out the key elements that you should be highlighting. The other thing is, since you are job searching, make sure that you are highlighting skill sets and experiences. Why do I say skill sets and experiences? Because a lot of students feel like, because I don't have a job, well, I haven't had an actual job, I don't have anything to offer, but that's not true. A lot of the things you've probably done in your extracurriculars are probably things that have helped you hone some skills that you can highlight. A lot of the courses that you've taken or the research that you've done in class have probably helped you develop some skills that could land you your next job. So that's one. The other thing to do is LinkedIn has all these groups. So you can join a LinkedIn group that is very specific to the industry that you're looking to go into. What that lets you do is a number of things. Number one, it helps you stay updated. If it's an active group, don't go for the groups that are not active. Go for an active group. If it's updated, people are probably sharing their experiences as professionals in that field. They're probably sharing relevant articles, that kind of stuff. So it's an easy way to get very, very specific information about the industry you're looking to go into. Number two, is an opportunity for you to see who is in that landscape and maybe what businesses and organizations are in that landscape that you might be interested in working with. Number three, it's a good way for you to network online without being too in your face about networking, right? So if you become an active participant on that group and maybe there's someone that you want to connect with, that becomes a good opening for you to send them an email or send them a message and say, oh, hi, I noticed that, or I'm Annalisa, I'm on the Marketers in Africa group on LinkedIn. I noticed that you shared this article about XYZ. I would like to have a conversation with you about this. Is that okay? So that's that. For job opportunities, please do not ask people for jobs. That has happened with me a few times where people send me a message and say, there was one in particular that really pissed me off. Because it was around the time that I had just left my 9 to 5 and I was trying to think about, did I make the right decision and am I going to be able to survive? And this person comes on and says, Jemila, I need a job. And I just responded in the moment because I was upset. I was just like, so do I. And then later I went in and gave a more helpful reply. But don't use LinkedIn to make big asks. Use LinkedIn to identify connections that could lead to mutually beneficial relationships both ways, right? So think about how you can approach people without being opportunistic. Yeah. Without being opportunistic, think about how you can build relationships with people without being opportunistic. In the US, I know there's a culture of informational interviews where you can actually request someone to give you a few minutes of their time to talk about their industry or whatever. There's an art to doing that, right? There's an art to doing that. And in order for you to do that, let me just give some quick tips. It's great if you have someone within your network. So if you have a mutual connection. So for example, Annalisa knows Chisom. Chisom knows me. And Annalisa wants to get connected to me. But Annalisa doesn't have a direct connection with me. Her mutual connection with me is Chisom. So LinkedIn has tools where I don't know, I feel like they removed it, but you can still ask Chisom to introduce you to me, right? I am more likely to respond to you because I know Chisom and I have some level of trust with Chisom, right? So always pay attention to if you have any mutual connections. If you don't have any mutual connections, make sure you do your research. Do your research on this person. Get a sense of what they care about. Take time to build the relationship. It should not be I want a job today, so I contact you today, and then I get upset because you didn't respond to me today. No, you should dedicate time to building a rapport with that person. And in your very first email or your very first message, because we do DMs these days too. So even with the DM, keep it professional, right? So for those of you who, I don't think too many people on this chat might do this, but if you do, don't go and say, hello, dear, hello, sweetie, hello, ma. Like, no, keep it very professional. If you are not sure if you're dealing with a man or a woman because of the name, and maybe it's a cultural thing, you don't know the name, just write out their name in full. So I might say, dear Annalisa Jemfosu, I got your information from Chisom, who suggested that I talk to you about XYZ. I am a fresh graduate in XYZ industry. I am exploring opportunities in ABC areas. I see that you have a lot of expertise in this. I read your article about that. I was wondering if you would be willing to give me 15 minutes of your time. Make it a small ask. Don't ask for an hour conversation, right? A lot of people have done that with me. And what ends up happening usually is once I say, okay, yes, let's have a 15-minute conversation, sometimes it might run to an hour because it was just a good conversation and because of how they approached it. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I hope it is. If it's not, let me know. I actually have a course on doing job search. I can give you access to that. Yeah.
And I should say as well that I think what you said is quite spot on, because people contact me quite often, say for job opportunities or internships. And there are people who say, hello, dear. And there are people who say, I want a job or I want to work for your company, and no other information, no CV, no, this is my experience, nothing. So I'm left to ask them, okay, what is your background? What is your experience? And that is not a place you want to be when you're reaching out to somebody who potentially has the power to refer you to somebody else or maybe get you a job. And I'm more open to the people who say, hey, Chisom, I've come across your profile and I see you've done this and that, or you run this organization or whatnot. I think I have similar interests and I would like to pick your brains for 15 minutes. Do you have some time for a phone call? I'm always keen to say yes to those people because I'm like, okay, there are people who helped me out in my path, in my journey to get here, and I want to pay it forward. But when somebody comes in and is like, hey, I want a job, or, they write you, and I think also watch out for grammar. I think it's important that when you write to people, you ensure there are no typos, because that could also be like, you didn't even take the time to proofread a short message. Why should I get back to you? So I just wanted to add that. So my next question, so we are running out of time. So just to put that out there, I want to respect everybody's time as well as Jemi's time as well. So I would just put it out now that I will talk to Jemi and try to see when next we can have a follow-up session on social media, because we're still on branding. We've not even gotten to social media marketing. And look at me, like Jamie and I were having this conversation and I said, I think we should be able to cover like personal branding and social media marketing in an hour and a half. And Jamie's like, I don't think so. I'm like, yeah, I think so. Well, I stand corrected. So obviously we can't, and we'll have to do like a part 2. And I hope people drop a yes or yes if you're keen to come for a part 2 session to hear Jemi speak. But I wanted to ask you a question that I got quite a lot from the community is, how do you ensure you don't annoy people when you are trying to brand yourself, when you're using social media marketing to grow? Because when I see your content, if I just say from personal experience, I always find it refreshing and informative. And not because, of course, I think you're amazing, I think you're brilliant and you're my friend, but you also have value to everything you put out. And then there are people who they put out information, I'm just like, this self-promoter, So what is that happy balance where all the content you put out is interesting and valuable, not to everyone, but to people, but just to ensure that you don't get, people rolling their eyes at you? How do you find that happy place?
So I think regardless, there'll be some people who will be annoyed. So there's that, because you're not for everyone, and there's that. But that said, the principle that I use is something that, if you know, okay, this is a little on the social media side. So if you don't follow this guy, you should definitely check him out. His name is Gary Vaynerchuk. He swears a little. Well, he's actually done better these days. He doesn't swear as much. But when I first found him, he did a lot of swearing in his videos and stuff, which was hard for me initially, but now like it just rolls over. And so he talks about something that I had been doing, but didn't recognize as something I had been doing. And his principle is give value, give value, give value, and then you ask for the sale. So you need to focus first on what you can offer to people. You need to demonstrate that first. And then by the time you're asking for the sale, you have already demonstrated, and more importantly, you have built a connection and also built trust, right? So try as much as possible, even if you're starting today. And I know that people want to say, oh, I'm selling this, DM me for price, DM me, especially on Instagram, DM me for price, or, come and buy this. But the question I will ask is, why should I buy from you? That's always the question, right? And in order for your goal should be to help people answer that question. For example, if you are creating an event and you want people to buy tickets, a lot of the time people will just post the event flyer, the amount, and then this is where you buy tickets, this is how you buy the information. But with Circumspect events, what we do is it's our business to give you a good reason to come to the event. And so what that means is we are not only going to tell you about the event, we're going to ask you, what do you want? Right. So we'll ask you, usually I start off, when I'm planning for an event, I'll start off with, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Are you interested? Would you come? Just to get a sense of the interest. Then we will, once we have, let's say, our panelists, we will highlight who our panelists are and why they have been selected for that particular event. We also highlight who our partners are and who our vendors are, right? And what they will be offering at that event. If you've done previous events, it's also important to highlight content from the previous events so that people can visualize like what they can expect, and then keep the conversation going. So it's the same principles that you would apply if you were trying to promote yourself. The question you're trying to get people to answer is, why should I care what Chisom has to tell me? Why should I, for most Africans, dedicate this expensive data that I have bought to watching what Jemila has to say?
Yeah.
Because people are making investments both ways. And so you need to be able to convince people about why that's important. So give value, offer value, offer value, offer value before you ask for the sale. Now, what that also means is that don't ask for the sale too much, right? I think a lot of the time when you're doing the marketing cycle, it's very easy to get caught up in, okay, so I just finished this, now I'm going to bring another this thing and ask people to pay for it. No, you have to give it a break, because if you're consistently asking the same people for the same things, at a point in time, A, either they won't have enough money, or B, they'll get tired of you. That's just normal. So you also need to be able to look at, maybe for a period of time, let's say for the whole year, how many events are you doing that, or how many products are you selling that require people to pay for it? And how do you spread that out over time? How do you ensure that in between that time, you're providing good value, whether it's content or insights or resources or whatever it is, to these people, so that they trust you and they continue to see the value that you bring. So those are really the questions that you need to be asking. Another thing is you need to make sure that you're targeting the right audiences. Not everything you're offering will be for everybody. And it takes a while to really figure out who is going to want what. So take your time to figure that out, right? You might have an idea of who your potential customer might be, but use the metrics that these platforms give you, the insights, the analytics, to have a sense of who your real audience actually is. And then see how you have to find a midway point between giving them what they want and then giving them what you really want to offer. So you have to find balance in that way as well. So I don't know if that's a helpful response.
I think it's great response. I think as much as I'm here, you know, interviewing you for this, I'm just soaking up so much information, and I feel like you open your mouth and just like so much value just drops out of it. So for me, this has been great. You know, like this has been fantastic. I want to ask one final question, if it's okay, just kind of to round it up, and then I will. I promise everyone and. Committing Jemmy to coming back without talking to Jemmy, but I think she'd be happy to join us and again to just follow up, because I have so many questions. You know, I wrote out 30 questions that I collected from the community, and I literally went through 2 and then started taking questions from everybody else. So there's a lot to talk about as to, you know, how do you set yourself apart from the competition? You know, how do you gain followers? How do you maximize social media? There's so much that I think is important to actually talk about. That would be great for the next session. But just to round up, my question is, do you ever stop learning? With this personal branding and social media marketing, is it a dynamic and evolving process? Like, what has it been for you? You started this, you know, 12 years ago, and I knew you right around when you started, you know, Circumspect. And you know, the things you were talking about then to what you're talking about now, and the knowledge and the places actually your brand and your company has taken you is quite, I mean, sometimes I talk to you, you're in Brussels, you're somewhere else, you know. So how is the process of growing along with your brand as a person? What does that involve? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So thank you. That's actually a really good question, and probably one of my favorites, because at the end of the day, it comes back to this question of what are your values and what are your principles. And I have always been someone who likes learning. I was a good student, except for some specific subjects, but overall, I enjoy learning. And so for me, all of this is about learning, right? All of this is about growing as an individual and hopefully about offering what I learn to other people, right? That's a big part of my mission, is to make it easier for other people to learn the things that I probably had to take a lot of time to learn. But once I get it and once I have a good sense of it, then I want to be able to offer that to other people so that they don't have to take as much time or struggle as much with that learning process. So learning is a big part of what I do. I'm always like trying and testing new things, even when I'm afraid. And that's important. It's actually a good thing to still be afraid, because if you are not afraid, it means that you're now comfortable. And when you're comfortable, it means you're not learning. So I literally try to find the things that make me just a little bit afraid, because it means that there's something to learn in that respect. And that applies both to like business and then also just like personal life and so on. And Circumspect has been, I mean, I'm so blessed with Circumspect because it has been probably one of the biggest mediums of learning for me. The process of, you know, figuring out digital tools, but also the process of figuring out what people want or what people need, or how to create like events. For example, there's this one event that I guess I would say it's one of my my proudest accomplishments in recent years, and it's called Sisterhood Matters. And it's an annual event that we do as part of International Women's Month. We do it towards the end of International Women's Month in order to create a space for women and girls to learn, grow, share, and support each other. And how that came about came from a very simple question: follow the questions, right? And the question was, why is it that I'm an African woman who is very vocal online, but the majority of Circumspect's audience switched from being very female to being very male? And why is it that a lot of the people who interact with me are not African women? So that was a question that I was like pondering over for years, trying to figure that out, because I really believe in the value of being able to see yourself in other people. And so one thing led to another. Sisterhood Matters was born really from sisterhood. Like, I was living with two of my friends who are also entrepreneurs who are facing similar challenges with regards to women supporting each other. And I went to an all-girls high school, all-girls college, and I have three sisters. And, you know, I have sister friends like Chisom. So women have been a big part of my overall growth and development. And so I was like, let's see, what can we do with this to try and create the spaces for women to feel like they can highlight their expertise, they can be themselves, they can support each other, they can learn from each other. And that was a learning process, because I didn't know if it was going to work. I didn't know if we would like still be able to do it. But 4 years down the line, we've done it 3 times, and we have not yet gone to sponsors for sponsorship, you know. And that is all about being willing to be in that space of discomfort and not knowing how things will pan out, and trusting the process. I know it sounds very whatever, but it works. Like, sometimes you are led to things and it's not meant to make sense right now, but down the line, I do not believe that anything goes to waste. Even now, as we're going through all of this stress with COVID, even for those of you who might probably have lost your jobs, or who are like trying to figure out, how can I stay afloat in this environment? Just trust that there is something bigger happening here, and the tools and the skills and the insights that you get from this period are going to feed, not just feed you, I believe they will actually propel you after all this is over. So everything has value. If your lesson in this moment is learning how to be still and how to rest, learn that lesson, because after this, when God willing, when we get out of the recession and everything, is like, it's gonna be go. It's gonna be go, 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 go. And you will be happy that you took the time right now to learn. You took the time right now to rest. You took the time right now to reflect and to plan and to strategize and to experiment. So do what you can with the given circumstances. Keep in mind what the larger mission and goal and vision are, and support each other. I think that is very, very important. Like, reach out to people. You don't have to go through any of this alone. When I was figuring a lot of this stuff out, there were people I would talk to. I had a small group of people who I could be like, look, I almost deleted this website because I'm tired. Like, I've been doing this for how many years and I don't understand. Like, you will have those moments, and all of that is part of that journey. And at the end of it all, I mean, you can call entrepreneurship whatever you want to call it, but it is very much just being human and learning and growing and becoming and changing and adapting and sharing what gifts you have with the world. So yeah, that's a very long response to, to your question.
No,
But
that was a great response. Thank you. If I could just cheat for a second and ask you a quick question, because this lady is a member of our community and she's been asking this question in every session. So she's wondering, how do you put yourself forward if you're not a product, but if you're just creating an awareness? So basically, she runs an organization called Humans for Humans, and they raise awareness and provide mental health solutions for victims of human trafficking, and also for support for the people who train or work with these people. So she's asking basically, how do I build my brand if I'm not a product, but I need to raise awareness of an issue?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's a very important one. And thank you for the good work that you're doing. I do think that it's possible, because at the end of the day, even if it's not a product, if it's not a service, the good thing about the digital sphere is actually not about ads and promotions. Like, that's what most people think. But the best ads, the best marketing is about stories. Just take a moment and think about it. If there was ever a product or a service or an event or experience that you signed up for, they probably told you a very good story. And in the space that you are actually in right now, like, I can only imagine the kind of stories you have, you know. So what I would say is, definitely take the time to see what are some of the standout stories from the work you're doing. Focus on the impact. So you are more like, the work that you are doing is probably, or you would have to do, is more like impact communications, development communications, nonprofit communications. And all of that, in order for it to be effective, should be grounded in storytelling. I don't know if you know about Humans of New York, but if you don't know them, that's one platform that you should pay attention to, because they do the digital storytelling very, very well. And is this notion of humanizing the issue, humanizing the people affected by that issue, and then highlighting the impact, or highlighting the potential for impact. Why do I say potential for impact? Because potential for impact being that, if, let's say, you're trying to get people to support the cause, you don't yet have the impact, but you want to highlight what the potential for impact is. Let me give you a quick example from Circumspect's experience, so that you have something like more concrete to work with. I was in a conversation with a friend from college who basically was, she worked with an organization that was supporting education of girls in slums in Accra, in Ghana's capital. And she had come across a girl who was, I think at the time, she was less than 12 years old. I can't remember her age exactly, but she was less than 12 years old. And this girl had faced the probability of getting married early and having to stop school because poverty and, her parents, yeah, it's complex. So no judgment here, right? So basically, she had faced the threat of early marriage, but she didn't want to stop school. And what she ended up doing was, she created a book club for young girls in the slums to go to after school, so that they could still work on their reading, they could learn from each other, they could be creative and all of that stuff. So my friend told me about them, but they were facing a challenge of raising funds, right? That was the problem that they were facing, raising funds. And especially because they had some girls who were about to finish junior high school. And that's usually the drop-off point. Like, a lot of girls will go to school up until junior high school in Ghana and other African countries, and then they never make it to senior high school, much more university, because at that point, they're in quotes of marriageable age, or they're old enough to be able to work and help generate income for the family. And so it's high probability that they fall off there. So they were trying to figure out how can they keep some of their graduating students in school. So what we did was, this is what I mean by storytelling, is raising awareness on an issue and then hopefully generating some impact, right? So what we did was, I had a phone call with the girl and her partner. She had someone else who she was working on it with. I just interviewed her, had a nice conversation with her, interviewed her, got a good sense of what the whole trajectory was and what they were doing and so on. And then I wrote an article about her and about what she's doing. And at the end of that article, I asked people for support. So what I could have done was just create a GoFundMe and say, hey, support this person. But even these crowdfunding platforms are built on storytelling. You're required to put a description, and that description should be about a story, right? Why is this important? By the time I get to the point where I'm asking people to contribute money or time or resources, by that time, they have already empathized with this person. They have, even if it's just for a few minutes, walked in this person's shoes or seen life from this person's perspective. And so by the time you're asking them to, support the cause, that emotional connection has already happened, right? And so, yeah, so that's what we did. And I mean, with that was in 2014, I believe. We raised over $2,000 in 10 days. This is before GoFundMe was like, all these crowdfunding platforms were really, really a thing in Ghana. It's now that it's becoming a thing in Ghana. But we were able to raise those funds, and they got support from different people who donated books, resource people who came to their sessions to give the girls a sense of what other possibilities there were for them. And then more importantly, 7 girls got to go to school for the next academic year without paying anything. So that's just a quick example of how being intentional about the storytelling, do a search for human interest stories. The New York Times does this really well, right? So pay attention to the style of stories that the New York Times does on some of these key issues. And those are the kind of stories that you want to put out. Of course, you need to make sure that you're respecting the privacy of the people involved. If children are involved, make sure you're not really putting children's faces out there, all of that stuff. I'm sure I'm sure you're a professional, you already know how to do that, but just remember to translate that online as well. And yeah, and I think you should make headway. And especially now, mental health awareness is actually a very important topic. So share some of those insights right now from a professional perspective. If you have an Instagram account, people are looking for content on how to cope with the uncertainty of these times. And you work in that space. So highlight the professional insights that you have. If there are resources that you can direct people to, ideally on your own platform. So if you have a blog, you can create a blog and then lead people to that site. And that's a way of creating awareness as well. Great.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jemmy. My heart is so full. This has been a fantastic session. I think I have learned the most today, from you and from listening. I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, I need to work with my team. We need to improve this. We need to improve that. So thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time. This has been fantastic. And thank you in advance for coming back to talk to us more. So I want to thank, I also want to thank everyone, for being here. Your time is valuable, and thank you for spending it with us. The reason why we do things like this at Diversify is because you validate our why by being here. So we know that we're providing value to you. So I thank you very much for your time, and I hope you continue to join us for future sessions. Jemmy, any last thoughts? Would you like to share? You also wanted to share some information. I think you should share some information about how people can reach you. Also drop it on the chat so I will also include as much information as possible on the newsletter that I sent through. But any last thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just trying to type here. But last thought, something else that might be interesting to some of you is Circumspect is organizing a webinar and online course on freelancing. It's really going to give you the essentials for getting started as a freelancer. So I think, let me just type in, just give me a few minutes to type all this in so that you guys have the details. And then you can follow Circumspect. Our website is circumspect.com. You can find us on pretty much all the social media platforms as Circumspect. So I'll type that out as well so that you have that information. And then personally, Jemila Abdulai. Typically, if you do a search for Jemila Abdulai, you should find me. But if you don't, it's at J Abdulai, my last name, J and my last name. For some platforms, the U in my last name might be a V because it wasn't available. But I'll type all of that so that you have that information. But I hope some of you can join the freelancing website, freelancing webinar. It's happening on May 1st. It is not a free session. We unfortunately had scholarships, but that ended 2 days ago. The deadline was 2 days ago. But if you let me know that you are coming from this session, I can arrange for a discount for you. So I'll put that information there. And on Circumspect, we'll be sharing continuously information on digital freelancing, remote work, and yeah, social media marketing and that stuff. So let me just type this out real quick so that
And I'll
you
also
guys
I'll make sure that all the information she's put forward here is also included in the newsletter, including her upcoming webinar and sessions that you all should definitely join. We're going to have Jemila back, of course, but you know, this topic is so vast and there's no end to what we can learn and how we can grow and how we can apply it to our lives or I'll say personal lives, and also in say securing work or starting our own business or brand. So be sure to put forward as much information as possible, and please follow her page. She always supplies you with more than enough information. So there's a lot she gives. So yes, we look forward to, I guess, y'all being a part of everything that Jemmy has to offer. And I'm like talking here so Jemmy finishes up. But yeah.
I saw what you're doing there. Thank you, girl.
Yeah. Okay, guys.
Okay,
Jemmy,
I
you
think
had a thought?
if you just do the registration, right? And then there's what's it called? There's a link to WhatsApp, and there's also an email address. So just either email me or WhatsApp me and let me know that you signed up, and then I can give you details on the discount and so on.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you again, Jemmy. I'm so grateful. Thanks for everything. And I look forward to the next session, because there will be the next session, because I have so many questions that I would like to go through with you. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Have a good day, guys. Take care of yourselves.
All right, Jemmy. Bye-bye.